Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Extraordinary Council meeting of the 21st of October 2021. We were due for a 2 p.m. start. Can I apologise that we are starting late? I just attended the funeral of Ray Nolan here in Dubbo on behalf of Council. It was a beautiful event in circumstances where Ray was a councillor on the predecessor council to this one. I might start the meeting by asking all councillors and senior staff just to stand for a moment's silence in honour of Ray Nolan. Okay, thank you, councillors. I'll formally open the meeting and advise that Council is now web streaming its standing committee and council meetings live to the internet, and as such, all those present should refrain from making any defamatory statements. Your attendance at this meeting is your acceptance of the condition that your image may be recorded and streamed to the internet, as well as being retained in the archive of the recorded council meetings and standing committee meetings. I now open the 21 October 2021 Extraordinary Council meeting, the time being 2:20 p.m. First up is Councillor Ryan with prayer and acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. O God, grant that by the knowledge of thy will all we may resolve shall work together for good. We pray through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Wiradjuri nation, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people from other nations who are present.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. There's no leaves of absence, and I might just note for the benefit of those viewing that Councillor Moore is appearing via an audio-visual capacity, but he is, under the current COVID arrangements, considered to be present at the meeting. I might just ask, in respect of conflict of interest, can I invite any councillor to declare any conflict of interest for any items on the agenda? Okay, there's no conflicts of interest. Next up would be our public forum. I don't think anyone has registered. Am I right in that, Mr CEO? Thank you. And there doesn't seem to be members of the public present. So we'll move straight on to the main agenda item, which is item CCL 21230, notice of motion of rescission in relation to the proposed referendum in respect of the ward system. Have I got someone to move the notice of rescission? Thank you, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Jones. And have we got a seconder for that? Thanks, Councillor Grant. Any questions or debate on that item, councillors? Thanks, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to address Council today. Look, I cannot support anything that would abolish the ward system within our local government area. What I want to understand is why, after 4 years that we've been on Council, we're waiting till 5 minutes before midnight to actually do something. I wonder if people really understand why the ward system was put in place. If the ward system was so bad, why in fact do they still exist in other local government areas within our state? Currently, and I've said this before, we have 37,080 voters registered for the upcoming election. Of those, 30,240 reside within the 4 Dubbo council wards, and only 6,840 reside in the Wellington ward. If you take into account that there was only 85% of the votes that were actually cast that were formal votes, you need to reduce that number. That would leave Wellington with 5,516 votes if in fact the number that I had previously quoted was correct. And it would mean if we increased our number of councillors from 10 to 11, that any candidates standing for any of the current wards within the Dubbo Regional Council area, if the wards were in fact abolished, they would need 2,602 votes to be elected. Unless Wellington, particularly the candidates in Wellington, receive first preferences not only from the Wellington people, but more importantly from the Dubbo voters, it is unlikely that we get more than one councillor elected in the current Wellington ward. I disagree with some of the comments that our Mayor has made, Mr Mayor, with all due respect. You have said on a number of occasions that you believe that there would be at least 2, if not 3 possibly, elected from Wellington should this proposal go forward for the abolishment of the wards. When you actually crunch the numbers, and I know that you've been in contact with certain other councils in relation to where wards have been abolished, and well, I think it was when wards were abolished or amalgamations have taken place, and it shows that there were councillors elected from some of the outlying areas, for example, like Wellington. I just cannot believe that we will have that support from the Dubbo voters. I'm really upset, to say the least, because for so many years we have worked, Councillor Grant particularly and I, have worked particularly in this last 4 years to try and bring the Wellington and Dubbo community together. By doing this, what you're doing is in fact putting another wedge. There are enough wedges there already, but you're putting another wedge between the Wellington and the Dubbo community. And I really am upset, because I thought we had made inroads in relation to bringing the two communities together so that we can in fact operate as one council. But that doesn't mean that you can't have wards, because that has been proven in quite a number of other local government areas that wards do in fact guarantee representation from the various areas that are outlying areas. And the other thing I wanted to say was, if you look at the last 4 years and the things that have in fact been held in Wellington, how many of the Dubbo ward councillors have in fact participated in any of those things? Who has gone to Eucarina? Who's gone to Stewarttown? Who's gone to Mumble? Who's gone to Gollan, to Ballymore, to Elong? It's only been the previous mayor and our current mayor, together with us two, and of course I believe Councillor Moore has been a number of times. What is going to happen if we are no longer in a position where we have representation from Wellington? Are the Dubbo councillors going to be prepared to travel a round trip of approximately 200 kilometres, giving up a minimum of 2 hours of their time, keeping in mind that there's no compensation for travel as well within the local government area? So I just don't see how it's going to work. I cannot see how Wellington will be given a fair go. I think this is all a political stunt just before the election, and I urge all the people that are listening today, and I'll make it my business to in fact go out there and publicly ask everyone to please vote no in relation to the referendum if that was to come up. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Jones. Any other questions or debate, councillors? Councillor Etheridge, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, 4 years ago, democracy was thrown out the window here in Dubbo Regional Council with the amalgamation, and I want to bring some of that back again by putting this referendum to the people. Let the people decide. Since the ward system was brought in, it has been nothing but a constant source of confusion and frustration. People should have the right to vote for whoever they want. It's a democratic right. So let's bring back democracy and let the people have their say on what they want, not what one person shoves down their throat. We have a strong focus on Wellington, and I can see that continuing. As I've always said before, what's good for Dubbo is good for Wello. I just want to see some democracy back and let the people have their say. If they want to keep the wards, all good and well. If they don't, all good and well as well. But let them have their say. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Etheridge. Any other questions or debate, councillors? Thanks, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And look, I thank you for allowing me the time to speak on this. And look, I fully support Councillor Jones in this matter, that we not push forward with the referendum. And look, I'm not going to talk all afternoon about this. It's just I really just want to reiterate some of the points that I've talked about before. And once again, as Councillor Jones talked about, we've worked so hard to make this amalgamation work, make this all happen, and now the last minute we're deciding to throw this referendum issue on the table. And look, to be honest, I'm happy to explore these. I have no issues, but not at the last minute, not when the consultation hasn't been done. We don't have figures, we haven't even looked at the options. And from my perspective, we haven't looked at every single option that could be on the table. We've looked at a north-south split. Obviously that's, a line going north-south. What about an east-west split? We haven't looked at that. How do the numbers look there? So there's options on the table that can still be discussed, and obviously the community, I'm sure they have ideas on how this all could look as well. So I've raised that before, and I think once again we're just rushing into this, and I don't think it's the time to be bringing this up basically 18 months after we probably should have been out of council. So in my opinion, we shouldn't be talking about this now. The next council, they can certainly discuss it, but I think this should be off the table and the referendum not going forward. Look, it was talked about being democratic. Obviously, if the referendum gets up and it's just a free-for-all, it's democratic for Dubbo. Obviously, Wellington misses out on their votes. So unfortunately, we've gone the other way. So, look, Mr Mayor, people will disagree with that, but once again, I think this just shows a lack of respect towards the people of the Wellington area, and it is, from my perspective, a political stunt. I think we've brought it up at the last minute. If we were going to do this, we should have decided this 2 years ago. If we were going to bring a referendum forward, it should have been done, absolutely 2 years ago. So for this to be brought up now, it's just for political outcomes. And Mr Mayor, look, I acknowledge you sent an email through the other day, and I appreciate that, about the information for, I think it was Snowy Monaro amalgamation, and the different councils there, and who they've been able to get onto the council. And once again, I think we're such a very different council to that still anyway. We've got one major New South Wales centre, the capital of New South Wales, in Dubbo, and then we've got Wellington, which is a major satellite city. It's a city of its own, and we need to acknowledge that and respect that. And unfortunately, I think if this referendum goes through, it's not acknowledging that, it's not respecting that, in my opinion. And look, whether this changes people's opinions, so be it, but I certainly am going to stand up for the people of Wellington and the Wellington ward, and the people that think that, and the people that believe that having a free-for-all in the voting is not the right way. I obviously believe that we should be keeping the ward system. How that looks into the future, it could be different, and I would support us looking into that. But once again, last-minute decision. I just don't think this is the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Grant. I might just specifically ask if Councillor Moore wants to speak. He's at a bit of a disadvantage given he's not in the room, so I might just check A, if he's there, and B, if he wants to speak in the debate.
Greg, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thanks.
Off you
Can you hear
go.
me?
Thanks, Councillor Moore.
I'd agree with Councillor Jones and Councillor Grant. I think it's very unfair that Wellington all of a sudden is not being given a voice. I've lived in smaller communities previously, and we've seen over the years that when they take the voices out of those local communities die off. The local people don't get representation. The local people don't get local issues put forward. And unfortunately, I think that with the removal of the wards, especially the Wellington ward, eventually that will happen. When people aren't getting listened to, people will just give up, and basically you'll see Wellington fall apart over the years, just without that local representation. As I previously said though, I agree with abolishing the wards. I don't think they're very well put together in Dubbo, but in saying that, we should have had more thought and more encouragement to the Electoral Commission on how these wards should be named for a start. We know they are deceiving and about the locations of the wards, the naming of the wards, which is unfortunate. I think if there was more enthusiasm and more input, especially from councillors that are on council now, to have the renaming of the wards, it could have had a different effect. We've only had one election with the wards. Our next election is only for 3 years. We could have seen how this went in the next election to see whether people actually find out what ward they are in, how they're going to vote, and so on. And I just find it disappointing that a couple of months out from an election, we're now looking at abolishing the ward system without thoroughly going through with every mechanism, every thought, every participation, not only from councillors but also the public, so they can have their input. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. Any other questions or debate, councillors? Councillor Ryan, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I would like to hear from you a bit later about the motion you put to the LGA conference. This is not something that is new. It's not something that's last minute. We've had a few events happen in this council in the past few months which has delayed a few things like this, but it's certainly not new. Mr Mayor, Dubbo Regional Councillors didn't design these wards. They didn't ask for them. The people didn't ask for them. We didn't insist that the wards need to have no greater than a 10% population differential. I've talked to the state government and I've been very public in the fact that the ideal situation for me would be a ward for Wellington which was proportional to its population, so that and it was designed so that Wellington would ensure 2 councillors to be elected and 9 from Dubbo. We'd have to move to an 11-person council. I said I wouldn't support this unless the referendum question said that we would move to an 11-person council. That reduces the size of the quota and makes it more likely that Wellington would get at least 2 people. My suggestion is that any Wellington residents who are concerned about a lack of representation or the ward system, they need to talk to the people who brought it in. So I would be talking to our local MP and I would be talking to Shelley Hancock. They're the ones who've said it's either all or nothing. Shelley Hancock is the one who can take a revised regulations and legislation back to the state parliament, and I would be quite happy to see, or very happy to see, a smaller Wellington ward, but a ward where democracy can work in Dubbo, where people can vote for who they want, and where we don't have a potential gerrymander system where one person can manipulate the system to get a lot of people voted in on about a quarter of the vote who otherwise wouldn't be elected. On this council, Dubbo Council was very successful and financially, and that was the reason that Wellington Council was absorbed. It was not. Now, to my recall, Dubbo councillors have never voted other than in a very positive way for Wellington. So many Dubbo-based councillors have put forward positive motions for Wellington during this council. It's one area, to my mind, it's not Dubbo versus Wellington, and that's the culture I've seen here. Early on in this term, Councillor Grant and I spoke about this, and he told me at the time he couldn't believe how invested all the Dubbo councillors were in Wellington's success. Now, just a few motions during this council that have been put forward, Mr Mayor, by Dubbo councillors. One about the erosion at the Bell River, Macquarie River Junction. A motion for the walking bridge over the Bell River. That council write to the Health Minister about resources at and doctors at Wellington Hospital. That council reviews charges at the Wellington Pool. These are Dubbo councillors talking about very specific issues that are of great import to the residents of Wellington. That council considers shade at Reigate Park. That council calls for submissions from Wellington for a New Year's Eve event. You don't get much more local than that. Extra line marking for the Wellington CBD. That the CEO develops a master plan for Wellington. That's pretty extraordinary for a Dubbo councillor to put up. That the CEO seek grant funding for silo art at Wellington. Mr Mayor, I would much prefer 2 wards, a smaller Wellington ward and a larger Dubbo ward. We've been told we can't have that. The ward system is incredibly broken in Dubbo. It endangers our democracy. The greater good is served by abolishing the wards if we have to either or. So if we have to either or, and we do in this case, because that's what the state government has told us we've got to do, I fully support and will vote for the wards to be abolished. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Any other questions or debate, councillors? Thanks, Councillor Diffie.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm not going to go back over the figures and the evidence that Councillor Ryan has provided. I won't be supporting the rescission motion today. I've listened to the public and to my fellow councillors here, and I appreciate where they're coming from. But I think to say that this is a political stunt before an election is really quite offensive. I think that we've all worked over the last number of years, and I understand we shouldn't be here. We got a bonus round, I like to call it. But as councillors, we have a responsibility to do our job. And, you know, part of our job is making decisions, whether we like it or not, tough ones they may be. The ward system was a bone of contention at the last election, and maybe, yes, we should wait till another one to see how it works out. Perhaps the referendum and changing the ward system to the one with the 11 councillors will mean that there's an opportunity for the next council to make further changes if they're possible. So I believe that there is the opportunity for Wellington to still be represented and to have strong representation. I have spoken in favour of a number of things of Wellington. I mean, the pool hours are now being extended on a Friday evening on a note that I picked up. So, I mean, I've grown up in the area and I'm familiar with Wellington, but live in Dubbo. So there's no reason why someone from Dubbo who is as familiar with the area couldn't do them as much justice as what Wellington elected councillors could do. That's all, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Diffie. Thanks, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Time for change. So, yes, I certainly understand that the Wellington ward, the concerns of the Wellington ward voters, but also understand too that the ward system makes it difficult for a council to get the best candidates on around the table. Councillor Jones' calculations, which I took note of at the previous meeting, and Councillor Jones mentioned again today, I did check those and pretty good. And if I think I'm pretty right in saying that 18 to 20% of voters would come from Wellington.
18 to 25.
Right, okay. So given that percentage, I would always expect that you would have 2 voices on council. Even if Wellington had no voices on council, you have to remember we are one council. It should be, local government is responsible for people, businesses, social and cultural development, and being part of the local community. You only have to look around to see what Dubbo Regional Council has done since the merger, and Councillor Ryan touched on all those, so no need in terms of repeating that. As I said, we are one council. I'd like to use one example of a proposal that went through, and it goes back to 2016-17, where the numbers did not stack up, but the motion was to put water on at Numunjeri. So that's one small village that was not ignored and did not have a voice around this table. So it doesn't matter where you are, we are, as I said, we are one council. In terms of timing, the word political stunt is being mentioned. I don't agree with that. The timing is correct because we are coming into an election, so it is to run a referendum at the same time as an election is quite appropriate. At the time of the merger back in 2016-17, there were a number of meetings held between residents and councillors, and we had a couple of workshops as well. So at those particular meetings, and before that even, the people of Dubbo and Wellington did not have a chance to vote on whether they preferred a ward system or one big council. So this proposed referendum is giving the voters a chance now to say yes or no of the ward system. So probably that's where I'm going to leave it. The proposed rescind motion has not provided me with any mitigants to the motion that was passed on to CCL 21-212, and as such I cannot support the rescind motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Parker. I might just say a few things about it. I certainly respect the contributions made by the Wellington councillors, and as part of this process I have asked myself what I would do if I were a Wellington councillor, and that's been a bit of a difficult question in some ways. I think Councillor Moore's suggestions that Wellington will die and fall apart are probably best put to one side in consideration of the matter. I think that reasonable questions deserve reasonable answers. Our Deputy Mayor has asked why now, and Councillor Grant has echoed that question. I suppose the simple answer to that is that Councillor Etheridge has moved the motion now, and therefore it has fallen to us all to consider it. There's been a suggestion, I think, that the fact that the election was deferred for a year and then again for 3 months is somehow a relevant matter and might render it illegitimate for us to proceed in this way. I don't accept that at all. In fact, it's our duty to make decisions. It's our duty to assume the burden of making decisions, and that is not a partial responsibility, it is a full responsibility until election day. And we must do that. There's been a suggestion that the process has been rushed. I would disagree with that in a number of respects, though I certainly accept that the motion itself was brought to Council, obviously in fairly recent times. But there has been a very extended process here, and the process started with the events of the last election, where if there was one issue that unified all people in Dubbo, it was that the ward system was completely dysfunctional. There was widespread confusion about what wards people were in. That had a very important consequence. It meant that the overwhelming majority of people, or certainly the majority of people, turned up at pre-poll or the ballot box not actually knowing who the candidates were. And many, many people had the misconception, for example, that they could come and vote for a certain person, and then they turned up literally in the ballot box and saw a very limited selection of people there. And I remember well those heady days of pre-poll 2017, and I remember the reaction from the community, and frankly, in my limited experience in politics, I have never experienced such a strident reaction from the community in the context of an election. People were ropeable. They were most unhappy. We responded to that by taking a motion to the Local Government New South Wales Conference pretty shortly after the election, and that was a motion to ask our peak body to lobby the state government to change the law to allow wards of different sizes, because at the moment all wards have to be of an equal size. That motion just narrowly passed at the conference, and then representations were made by LG New South Wales to the state government, and the answer from the state government was very swift and very sure: no, we have no intention of changing the Act. What was interesting at the local government conference was just how narrow the vote was, and the very strong views expressed at the conference that wards in a ward system should be of an equal size. And I hadn't thought it through in a complete sense, to be frank, and when I turned up at the conference it was quite interesting to hear all the perspectives, many of them informed by historical events about the way that wards can be manipulated and why it is so important to have wards of equal sizes. And I think ultimately the vote was 49-51. It was a very narrow vote. So almost the majority of the elected representatives of the councillors across the state were against it. The Office of Local Government was swiftly against it. So people out there that are running the line that we should somehow continue these attempts to lobby the state government, and the answer is a legislative amendment, I can tell you right now, it ain't going to happen. It is not going to happen. So we have to deal with the issue before us. It's our responsibility to do that, because Councillor Etheridge has brought it to us. There's been a suggestion in the discussion this afternoon that it's rushed in the sense that we haven't considered alternatives. Now, in a fundamental sense, there's only two alternatives: a ward system or a quota system. Those are the two systems provided for in the Local Government Act. If you have a ward system, you can choose your amount of wards, but you must have wards of equal sizes. Now, if one looks at this question from the point of view of maintaining Wellington representation, it's pretty difficult to work out a workable solution that would involve more than one ward that somehow prioritises that question of Wellington representation. You inevitably end up with part of Dubbo and part of Wellington in one ward. That is not going to achieve what we are striving to achieve. It's going to be confusing. It's not going to have communities of interest together. And indeed, in all of our discussions and briefings, nobody has really proposed an alternative in a serious way. And I think that's because there is no alternative. There's either a ward system or a quota system. It's really important to balance all the considerations, and I certainly, as I've said, have a lot of respect for what councillors Jones and Grant have said. But if you put on one side of the equation all the disadvantages of the ward system, and it's not just confusion, it's not just low understanding of who the candidates are, it's also a poor choice of candidates. It's wards in Dubbo where there was not a real choice. It's wards in Dubbo where everyone knew well before the election who was going to be elected. It's wards in Dubbo where people walked out of the polling booth and said, frankly, I didn't want to vote for either of you, but I had to vote for you. And I had plenty of those conversations with people who voted for me and endorsed Labor candidate in circumstances where they wouldn't normally have, because there was very limited choices in that ward. I'm sure it occurred to various other people in various different wards. So we need to weigh all of that up on one side, you know, this reality of cutting a regional community into 5, therefore cutting the candidates into 5, and then seriously presenting to the community that they have an appropriate range of choices. So all that's on one side. Then on the other side of the equation is what the Wellington councillors are telling us in quite a persuasive way about the question of representation. But to my mind, the fundamental problem with their argument is it's not actually supported by any facts. There has been no examples taken to us of merged councils where small communities have lost their representation. And in fact, all the evidence that has been gathered, and the staff gathered some, and Ron Batten, who's a resident of the region, sent me and the other councillors some analysis of the Snowy Monero Regional Council, which was created with the amalgamation of 3 previous councils. The smallest of those councils has a population of 2,400. the combined population of the new local government area is 20,000. That small community of Bombala elected 3 representatives onto the new 11-person council. And our staff brought to us in one of our briefings some other examples of merged councils. So on that other side of the equation that we have to balance with all the negatives of the ward system, we actually don't have anything beyond, in my view, kind of speculation. It's legitimate for the Wellington councillors to raise it because there is at the moment a guarantee of representation. But in a hard facts and evidence sense, in terms of the way that I'm approaching it, I just am not prepared to wave away all those negatives on the basis of this speculative idea that 18% of our regional community is not going to elect any representatives. I think that it doesn't make sense to me, and I've gone back in previous times over electoral results in the old Dubbo City Council. People were elected on very small primary votes, and then they get a flow of preferences because they're there on the ballot paper, and the last however many spots are elected by people with pretty small primary votes. I have absolutely no doubt at all that if our fantastic Wellington councillors, Councillor Jones, our Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Grant, had stood in a one-ward system for Dubbo Regional Council, they would both have been elected. I have no doubt about that. I also have no doubt that both would have attracted votes here in Dubbo. And it will continue to be so. It just doesn't make sense that 5,000 to 6,000 people in that ward, and I know that it's less in the township of Wellington, but it just doesn't make sense that they will not, in our regional community, elect representatives. It would only happen if Wellington people didn't vote for Wellington candidates. I think that's extremely unlikely. I suppose another factor that might push in that direction would be if no Dubbo people voted for any Wellington candidate. But again, that's so unlikely, in my view, as to really be speculation. I'm really satisfied that Wellington will continue to elect councillors. I'm sure of it. I don't think it's a reason to vote for the rescission motion. I think we do need to push on with the referendum. We need to make the decision. It's really important, in my view, in the debate, because this is a political issue, and it is so in the community, though I certainly don't accept that it's a political stunt, as our Deputy Mayor has suggested. I think we're all voting according to our conscience on what we believe on this one. But there are people out there in the community that are interested in this and talking about it. And it is important that there be a basis of reality in that debate. There's all sorts of things that are being said on social media and in different statements that really are quite untrue. There's one thing that I've read that if you move away from a ward system, only political parties will get elected to council. That is actually the opposite of reality. And you only have to appreciate that by looking at the composition of this council, comparing it to the composition of previous councils. I'll say this loud and clear. The ward system advantages political parties. The ward system advantages groups. The ward system advantages people who control or influence other candidates across a range of wards. Now, the ward system seriously advantages people who have a significant minority of support across the local government area. And the reason for that is quite obvious. When you have a ward system that elects 2 people in each ward, you effectively halve the quota. You can get elected to 1 of 2 spots in a ward with a primary vote of somewhere between 20 and 25%. That means if you're a person controlling a group and you have a significant amount of support across the community but still a minority amount of support, you could get half the spots on council with only a quarter of the vote. That is why, in a fundamental way, the ward system advantages political parties and the ward system advantages established groups. And if you look back at the previous composition of Dubbo City Council, I don't think there was ever an endorsed political party person on that council. Not ever. And in fact, to my understanding, when I stood in 2017 as an endorsed Labor candidate, I was told things to the effect of, we've never had an endorsed person on council in Dubbo. That was in the context of a quota system. So anyone out there suggesting that this is some sort of party political trick is basically just telling lies and misleading the community. It would be a real shame if this issue was manipulated in that way. It's really important that when people vote, they vote on the facts and the issues, not on distortions and exaggerations that people seek to inject into the debate for their own personal political advantage. So those are my comments, councillors, in terms of why I will certainly be voting against the rescission motion. Any other questions or debate? Thanks, Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, for starters, I find the allegation of a political stunt extremely offensive. This isn't about politics as far as I'm concerned, it's about the people. And it's about and as far as the timing's concerned, it's paramount. We've got an election coming up. We'll have people being able to do the referendum as well as doing their vote. That way we capture everybody. If we run it separately, some people will think, I can't be bothered. So it's certainly no political stunt. It's taking advantage of the election to make sure that we capture all of our residents and get all of their opinions and all their wants. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Etheridge. I think we've probably all had our say. If everyone's happy to proceed on that basis, I'll put the rescission motion. All those in favour? All those against?
Just get Greg's audio.
Councillor Moore, I might just ask you to indicate if you are voting yes to the motion or no.
I'm in favour of the rescission motion.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. I declare it defeated. There's no further items for consideration of this extraordinary council meeting, and I declare the meeting closed, the time being 3 p.m. exactly. Web streaming has now been completed. I thank everyone for their attendance.